Good morning. Welcome to the Budget and Appropriations Committee meeting. I'm Danielle McCray, Chair of the committee and also the councilperson for the 2nd District. At this time, just as a reminder for everyone to silence their cell phones. Joining us today, we have members of the committee, Vice President Sharon Green Middleton representing the 6th District, and also Councilman Paris Gray representing the 8th District. In addition, we have several representatives from the Mayor's Office, the City Council President's Office, and also the Office of Council Services. And our staff member representing Council Services and staff in the committee today is going to be Paroma Nandi. Today, we're here for Bill 25-0138, Excise Tax Increase Passenger for Hire Services. And this bill proposes to increase Baltimore's passenger for hire excess tax from 25 cents to 38 cents per trip. The administration is projecting that this could generate up to roughly $2 million annually with a partial year impact in FY26, depending on timing. As budget chair, I take two responsibilities seriously at the same time. That is making sure that we are honest about what it takes to fund city services, as well as making sure that we're not balancing budgets on assumptions that don't hold up. Today, I want to make sure that we have three things clearly on the record regarding this bill, that we are speaking on revenue integrity. The fiscal estimates assumes that this increase does not reduce ridership, and I want to make sure that we understand the data behind it and what happens if reality does, in fact, look different. Second, collection and accountability. We need to make sure that there's a clear explanation of how these funds are collected, when a city actually receives them, and what reporting the city gets to verify accuracy. And third is going to be impact and equity, because we know that a flat trip rate is going to fall hardest on short essential rates. That's going to be people who are traveling to medical appointments, they're doing quick grocery runs, late night workers who just need to get home safe and quickly. I do appreciate everyone for joining us today, and we're going to start with agency reports and presentations at this time. The Law Department has submitted a bill report stating that you approved the bill for form and legal sufficiency. Do you stand by the report?
Yes, Desiree Leckie on behalf of the Law Department, we approve for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you. Department of Transportation submitted a favorable bill report. Do you stand by your bill report, or do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. DOT stands by its favorable bill report. That's all.
Thank you. And we're going to have a presentation from the Department of Finance, who
Yes.
also submitted a favorable bill report.
Yes,
For committee members, and I apologize, for committee members, we're going to hold all of our questions until after the presentation is over. Thank you.
Sure,
And you
thank
have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Bob Senemy representing Department of Finance today. And yes, we have a couple of slides we wanted to walk folks through on this bill. And once they pop up, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you. So just to start, so the bill the increase we're asking for today is, we want to talk about this in the context of our 10-year financial plan, which was just launched back in December of 2025. So the idea of the 10-year financial plan that you heard from us is we want to be able to balance the budget while also investing in the things that will help to improve and grow our city. And the plan is built around three cornerstones: core service delivery, infrastructure investment, tax competitiveness. And this initiative is actually one of the initiatives under the tax competitiveness section of the report. There are 85 initiatives in the 10-year plan. 11 of those require city council approval, and this is the first one of the 10-year plan that's coming to the council. There will be a couple more that we'll be seeking approval for over the upcoming months and years. One of the themes in the 10-year plan, one of the smaller themes, is that we have a lot of taxes or fees where we have dollar-based fees. And anywhere you have a dollar-based type fee, you have to adjust it to keep up with inflation over time. So, we have some rates in our budget that are percentages, like the income tax rate, for example, hotel tax rate. Those things naturally keep up with inflation because as the price of those things grows, the revenue collection grows. But when you have fixed dollar in either fees or taxes, you have to make sure you come back periodically to adjust those, and that's what we're asking to do today on this particular bill. So to get into the details on this particular bill, there we go. So just a little bit of background. So back in 2014, the city established a tax, a flat rate of 25 cents per trip on any kind of taxi cab trip. And obviously the market has changed dramatically since then. Most of the market is made up of what we call these transportation network service providers, which are companies like Uber and Lyft. And so in fiscal 25, that tax generated about $3.8 million for the city's general fund that has to be dedicated to transportation-related projects. And fees from these transportation network service providers make up by far the vast majority of the revenue. Nearly 100% of the revenue now comes from the Ubers and Lyfts of the world as opposed to the taxi cab companies. In terms of the implementation of this fee, the tax only applies by law to trips that originate within the city. And the tax is actually collected from by the city for the taxi cab companies, but the transportation network service providers actually provide all their information to the state comptroller, and then that tax is remitted back to the city from the state on a quarterly basis. In terms of benchmarking, I want to start on the right-hand side of this slide. So Maryland state law currently caps the per trip tax at 25 cents, but Baltimore City has an exemption to that law, so we're allowed to change our cap at any time. There are now 4 other counties, Montgomery County, Prince George is listed there. Also most recently, Anne Arundel and Howard County also have a 25-cent per trip tax on fee on these rides. So there are 4 other counties that are similar to us that have that 25 cents. There are also 4 other municipalities, Annapolis, Frederick, Brunswick, and Ocean City also have this tax or fee, we should say. Compared with regional peers outside of Maryland, it's a little bit different, but there are other parts of the country, especially some cities in the Mid-Atlantic region that have similar fees. So you can see in Washington, D.C., it's a 6% tax. In Philadelphia, it's a 1.4% tax. And then in New York City, there's a 4.5% tax and then an additional $2.75 congestion fee. We lined up what the cost is for those for an equivalent $20 ride, and you can see what those costs are, and they're higher than the cities. We're getting 25 cents for every example $20 ride, where some of these other counties or jurisdictions in other parts of the country are getting more for a similar ride. So our, even though we're limited by state law that it has to be on a per trip basis, we generate a little bit more than some of our peers, at least in the Mid-Atlantic region. In terms of the legislative proposal, we're proposing to take the tax from 25 cents to 38 cents. We actually talked about going from 25 a quarter to 50 cents, and the feedback we got was to try to phase this in over time, to try to do half of it, and then to come back down the road at some time, 3 to 5 years from now, to consider going higher to see how the market reacts to this. An increase from 25 cents to 38 cents is pretty small for a ride that averages about $20. That would only be a 0.6% increase in the total cost to the end customer. This estimate this tax would generate an additional $2 million based on our estimates of additional revenue in the general fund. And again, by state law, that has to go back to transportation-related projects. This legislation, if it were passed, it would take effect 120 days after enactment, because there is a state requirement that we do give notice for this to all those service providers. So if it were passed, we wouldn't begin collecting revenue at that higher rate for an additional 120 days, which would be about 4 months after enactment. On the right-hand side, You can see the annual revenue estimate that we put together. We don't know for sure, we're able to estimate the number of rides we have by backing into it. We don't get specific data from those companies. The state law does not allow us to get detailed information from the providers, but based on the revenue that we collect, we're able to back into assuming that we get there's about 15 million rides in the city of Baltimore that originate in Baltimore. And you can see the revenue from the 25-cent rate is about 3.8 million. We would generate more from the 38-cent rate, which would bump it up to 5.8 million, which is where we get that estimate of an additional $2 million from this particular tax if this bill were to be implemented. I just wanted to note that we did include the revenue in the fiscal 2026 budget, but because of the timing lag of that additional 120 days before the bill would go into effect, before we could start charging that rate, plus the time it takes to kind of get through the process and get the hearing scheduled and get passage, we've downgraded what we would think we would collect for this for fiscal 26 down to only about $540,000. But I do want to stress that this is more a long-term financial plan issue rather than just balancing 26. We would like to get this in place so that we're generating this revenue going forward in not just fiscal 26, but in 27 and beyond. And so with that, I'll pause, and if anybody has any questions, the last slide just says questions, so.
Thank you. Can you talk about why we're choosing the flat rate as opposed to a percentage-based rate like the other jurisdictions?
So that's just a requirement of state law in Maryland. So the state law says that it has to be done on a per trip basis. So local jurisdictions in Maryland have to choose a rate on a per trip basis. That's not how it's done in other parts of the country. Some parts it's a percentage rate, as you saw, like in Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia or New York. So that's why we're coming back and asking for a rate increase, because generally the cost goes up over time, and we don't want our tax to lose value, just with inflation over time. Whereas those that are done on a percentage basis tend to keep up with the cost of inflation without having to change the rate. So it is just the way that the state of Maryland set up this program.
Thank you.
Yep.
You answered one of my other questions within the presentation, and that was why we weren't still going with what was proposed within the 10-year plan and moving it to 50 cents. So what decisions would actually trigger the phased-in approach that you guys are talking about?
Yeah, I think we see eventually getting to 50 cents as a long-term goal. Within the 10-year plan, we would want to come back. We've been saying about every 5 years to adjust all the things that are in our code or in the law that need adjustment. I know we're going through a separate exercise looking at a whole host of fines and fees. And again, you've heard from us that some of those have been baked into the code or have been fixed for many years and haven't been updated for many years. So we see every 5 years is the right time to do some kind of review. So that's what we would expect for something like this, that we put it in place. We see how it works. We see if there's an impact. We think that the impact is so small that you won't see much impact on ridership or number of rides. And then we would be committing to come back every half a decade or so and look at this and any other fines and fees that we have that need to be updated and review them and make proposals if we need to make changes. We could come back and say that rate is fine 5 years from now. We don't need to change it. We could come back and say we need to bump it up, but it just depends on what the market looks like when we come back at that time.
And just so I understand, you're saying one of the primary decisions would be an impact on ridership, and right now, as you stated, and from the reports, it was stated that it would be minimal, or that was the assumption that it would be minimal.
Yeah, that's our assumption. We think it would be. Again, it's, you never are going to know for sure, but the fact that if you take a $20 ride, for example, and tack this additional small increase on, it only equates to a zero, like basically a 0.5% increase on the average customer. So we think that's minimal enough that it won't be too much of a burden. I mentioned earlier, we don't, unfortunately, because of the way the state program is set up, we don't get detailed information on the rides and where that, we know they originate in the city, but we don't know where. We know a little bit about the user base just when you do some research on surveys. So we acknowledge that there are people, that use this pretty regularly, but we also know there's a meaningful subset of users who are visitors to the city, and that was one of the reasons we initiated this way back in 2014, is you want people that are visiting the city, that are using the city's infrastructure, to at least be paying a share for, riding around in a vehicle. So it's probably a mix of both, but we don't know for sure how many are kind of residents versus people that are visiting the city. We would love to have access to that data, but we just don't have it today per the state law.
So what data do we receive at all? What does the city receive at all from the state to just ensure that we're able to audit for accuracy, that we're receiving the correct amount of funds that we're supposed to get?
Today, we just get a check. And again, that's a limitation of state law. We were actually talking earlier, been talking about, as part of our 10-year plan, there is an initiative to try to work with the state comptroller to see if we can strengthen our ability to audit some of these records. This is one today that we don't have much authority, but that's something that we could work with the state on. I can't say that we're not getting the full amount. There's no way to know, but I'd rather be able to see, more detailed records, of course, than not. So today, unfortunately, we just get a check.
Yeah, just like you said, it's no way to know. Is there any lag time, like a historical lag time from when we're supposed to, when the state is supposed to remit the payments? Or has there been any issues in the past?
Every quarter we've been getting, that's our revenue director, Pedro Ponte, and we've been getting the payment every quarter. So yeah, no issues there.
Okay, well, thanks for answering my questions. We're going to go to Vice President Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You had mentioned you can go up to 50 cents, but I'm glad that you, your office kind of made a decision to ease into the 50-cent increase. And I know that the increase is probably going to go to the customer, and I don't know if this question is for DOT or if you can answer, but there's ways to advertise this increase, and you have to be creative about it, and it's also a type of educational piece, because when consumers see the word tax, that's all they see, and the conversation, here we go again, they're just going to block everything. The conversation comes up, they tax us for everything. Is your office working with DOT on ways to advertise to our general community? What type of advertisements are going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we can do, and that we will with DOT. I mentioned earlier, there is that 120-day lead time requirement, which is more focused on the actual service providers themselves, but we can use that time to make sure we talk about, ways that we can better communicate this. Again, it's small enough that maybe some people won't notice the difference, but it's still important to be honest with folks and explain what's coming, especially for folks that are using this more regularly.
Mm-hmm. Within the downtown area. And then the other question, this goes, you had mentioned this goes to the general fund, but it's assigned basically to Department of Transportation. Does the Department of Transportation have a set placement of what they're going to be doing with this extra money?
No, it's similar to, I would think of it as similar to highway user revenue, and that you get all this money and it has to be spent generally on certain activities. So the transportation budget is so much larger than this tiny allocation, since we're only bringing in a little less than $4 million, that we haven't designated it for one purpose, but the state law does say that it has to be used for transportation. So, but our revenue is so minimal. We spend so much more on transportation, of course, that, we've chosen not to designate it in that way.
So that's a conversation that the council can have with transportation and I guess the mayor's office of how, ways we would like to see the money
Yep.
spent, and be helpful.
Yeah, of course, yep.
Thank you for that clarification. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For financial considerations for our seniors and low-income residents, what analysis did finance make to make sure the increase of this size would not meaningful change the behavior of riders? And I know that some information is sparse, like coming from the state, but looking towards Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., New York, when there were increases, did it affect how many people were that were able to take a ride share or Uber or Lyft? Did it change the behavior? And what analysis did you get from that?
Sure. So we did do some research of other peers. Like I said, the data tends to be very limited in Maryland. It's that way in many other states as well. So we did do some research to see if there was any analysis of any change in behavior, and we couldn't find any. We also generally call on some research about just the change in demand given the change in a percentage of a certain tax or fee. And what we found over time is that if things are pretty limited within a pretty narrow range, that you're not going to see much change in behavior. Again, I'll acknowledge that, this is a dynamic market, so you don't know exactly how something this would play out. But over time, we've seen some increases in other fees or issues in our budget where we haven't, when it's this small of a change, that you don't see much change in the demand. And I mentioned earlier, I was looking even just earlier this week at, there is some survey data out there about who tends to use these services. And there is data that suggests that, over time, more and more people use these services as part of their kind of daily routine, and that's changed. A lot of it is focused on it's younger users that tend to use these services more. Again, that's like very broad survey data when you look kind of like nationally, that's not focused on Baltimore. So the combination of those things would make me think that maybe not as big of an effect on seniors because they aren't the primary user. But again, not exactly sure how that will play out.
Yeah, because when you think about just the comment that was made earlier where the goal is to go to 50 cents, if we see that there is a drop in users utilizing rideshare, are we thinking as a city of going the other way, or are we just going to hold the line at 38 cents?
I mean, we could. It depends. If something were to go in the wrong direction, we would definitely consider backing off. Again, we had thought of this as because it's a dollar-based rate that you just have to make some adjustments even just to keep up with inflation. If the cost of ride increases over time and the rate is flat, people are paying actually less of a tax. So that we saw it more as keeping up with inflation, but if we were to see some significant change in the market, we would certainly consider that and come back and make a change.
Yeah, the way I look at it, a 13 cents increase, when this was first posed, I thought we were talking mileage, and that to me was a great concern. But once I figured out it's flat rate.
Right.
So your $20 and 13 cents now is $20.26.
That's right.
That isn't a significant hike for a lot of people, but when we're looking at the increase, and this is all in an effort to stabilize the financial feasibility and just the city's budget, why was this increase preferable to other options that may have been considered for city residents overall? And why was this something that was chosen over some type of other increase in fees that don't necessarily affect those that are low income or in vulnerable situations?
So the priority has been to try to protect and even lower in the 10-year plan the property tax rate, because that's what we hear is by far the biggest inhibitor to people staying in Baltimore or people deciding to invest. So, as you know, I know I briefed all of you over the course of the summer and the fall about the 10-year plan. The real focus was how can we get some reduction in the property tax rate and actual real relief to people in property taxes, because that's what we hear is always number one. So if you want to prioritize property tax especially, then you have to make choices on these other ones, and that's why we chose some of the smaller fines and fees and some of the smaller fees like this one, because we wanted to, if we're trying to look for ways to kind of keep pace on revenue, we're still trying to figure out a way to really protect that property tax, because that team's that, in the feedback we get is always that's the, number one issue with investing in Baltimore. And we'll be coming with more on that property tax plan over the upcoming months and years. But in the 10-year plan, the focus is to get the rate down and to deliver direct relief to folks. So, we have to make up some of that lost revenue by keeping pace on these types of things. So that was kind of the choice, and that's kind of the focus of the 10-year plan, is let's really zero in on property tax relief, but, be smart about making sure that we have these other things keep up with inflation.
Thank you.
So I have two concerns. Obviously, the first is that even though the amount that we're projecting $2 million, it's a small amount compared to the total DOT budget. But I still feel that with all this time, with the 10-year plan, that we should have thought about, hey, this is where that money would go. It would go to traffic infrastructure, or it would go to road maintenance in certain areas. So what I would say is that in the near future, I would like to see like some type of idea of what we would be considering to do with this money. The second item is something that right now is out of your hands, but for the mayor's representative, we have to go to the state. Like, we cannot just collect a check and not have any information or any data about where it's coming from. If the council was saying, hey, we're concerned about an equity impact, and the administration is constantly saying as one of their pillars, talking points, that equity is a big deal. For this, we can't tell an equity impact without any data. So I know, and we would know, just common sense would just say, if it's 13 cents. If you're taking a ride once a week, or you're taking a ride once a month, that's not going to hit you. But as one of my colleagues says, he throws out a number of how many Baltimoreans, adults, do not have vehicles and they rely on it. So someone may be using an Uber or Lyft or any rideshare service 4 to 5 times a day. So what I would want to see, and what I'm sure that I don't want to speak on behalf of you, but I think that you guys would want to see some type of advocacy on the state level with the comptroller's office about making sure that we do have additional data for transparency.
Yeah, we can do that. I can promise you that we'll do that. We'll talk to them. It would likely be a change in state law. I can tell you just from background, from having been involved in this issue for a long time, even when we set up the tax originally, there's a heavy industry influence that didn't want to share a lot of data. I think for obvious reasons that makes us worried. And I think when the tax was set up originally, it was Baltimore City was the only one using it. Now that you have more and more counties, I mentioned earlier in our presentation, there's 5 counties total. There's additionally these smaller cities that have the tax. I think there might be an avenue for us to go back and say, hey, maybe it's worth us to have more transparency in the data so people can understand, the dynamics when they make changes to the rate. But when this went into place, Baltimore City was the only one. So that might have played into it. I do remember there was, early stages of that industry becoming more prominent. They did, of course, for obvious reasons, didn't want to share a lot of data on rides and ridership and where they originated. So we'll definitely go back and talk to the comptroller about it. If it requires a change in state law, then we'd have to, talk about that kind of collectively with the administration, but we'll promise you that we'll go back and do that. It's something that's very important to our team because I can share with you that, we've talked a lot about our corporate compliance office that we set up for the city. We have over the years found many people that were not paying, and it just took the ability to audit or to ask for records where we found things that was like, wait a second, you haven't been paying hotel tax or parking tax for many years. Is the same thing happening here? I don't know, because we don't know, but I'd like to at least have the ability to kind of dig in and track that down. So we feel probably just as passionately as you guys do on that for sure, so we will make sure we do that. And then if it does require change in law, we would come back and obviously discuss if that's something we want to advocate for.
Vice President Middleton for follow-up.
Just on that same discussion, very good discussion. I just want to remind you that we are a part of the Maryland Association of Counties, and they can help advocate for what you want with this tax. I mean, that's part of the job and why we pay dues to that organization. And just by coincidence, I just got an email yesterday that they would like me to be the vice chair of the tax subcommittee. So this would be a good thing to talk to your contact, if you do have a contact with the Maryland
we do.
Association of Counties.
We will.
That can come.
Yeah, so our team manages that piece, and we would also obviously take a look at, we'll work with the Department of Finance and the City Administrator's Office to have a conversation with Comptroller Learman about the increased transparency and separately explore what action we would need to take at the state level to change, obviously, our priorities for this session or staff, but we can start conversations now in preparation for the next legislative session.
Very good, thanks.
For my last question, is there any confirmation or has there been any conversation with Uber and Lyft about I'm going to make an assumption that it would be passed on to the customer. Has there been any conversation about what it looks like in the app? Are you guys making an assumption it's going to be very similar to the past tax that was put in, or have they stated any other items, how it would look? Would it look differently?
Yeah, so you don't see it. It's our understanding today. I mean, if you take a ride, you don't see it in the app. It's kind of baked into the ride rate. And so we assume that it would look the same way.
Thank you. We're going to check to see if we have anyone who has signed up for public testimony at this time. Okay, thank you. So at this time, we're actually going to take a vote on this bill. Is there a motion to move Council Bill 25-0138, excess tax increase passenger for hire services as favorable? So moved. Was moved favorably by Councilman Gray. We're going to do a roll call vote at this time. McCray is a yes. Schleifer is absent. Vice President Middleton?
Yes?
Councilman Gray?
Yes.
Okay, so that's going to be 3 yeses, 2 absences. This motion passes. This bill will move to second reader at our next council meeting on January the 26th, and this hearing is now adjourned.